The massive viewport of Nexus Prime stretched across 300 meters of reinforced crystalline composite, offering a view of the spiraling galaxy that had become humanity's judge and jury. Captain Han Wu stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching alien vessels arrive in formations so precise they seemed choreographed. Each ship represented a species that had voted to put humanity on trial, and each carried the weight of civilizations far older than Earth's first cave. Paintings. 15 billion souls back home are counting on us, Dr. Park Soo-jin said quietly, joining him at the viewport. Her reflection in the crystal showed the exhaustion they both felt after 3 months of preparation for this moment. No pressure, at all. Han Wu allowed himself a bitter smile. When has humanity ever done anything the easy way? The station around them hummed with alien technology that defied human understanding. Gravity flowed in impossible directions, creating walkways that spiraled through 3-dimensional mazes. The air itself seemed to shimmer with translation fields that converted thoughts into universal concepts, though Han Wu suspected some nuances would be lost forever in the conversion. Ambassador Vextar approached them with the fluid grace that marked his reptilian species. His scales shifted color in patterns that human xenobiologists had learned indicated formal politeness, though the underlying emotional markers suggested something closer to distaste. Captain Han Wu, Dr. Park Soo-jin. The tribunal is ready to begin. The chamber they entered defied every human architectural instinct. 12 distinct environments had been seamlessly merged into a single space, each tailored to a different species' needs. Crystalline beings floated in pools of liquid light, while gas-based entities swirled in contained atmospheric columns. The Hive Coalition representatives stood in perfect geometric formation, their thoughts synchronized to the point where individual identity seemed meaningless. At the center of it all sat High Chancellor Morden of the Crystalline Collective, his form resembling a living cathedral of faceted diamond. When he spoke, his voice resonated through both sound and electromagnetic frequencies, creating harmonics that made human teeth ache. We gather today to address the question that has plagued our galaxy since first contact. What do we do with humanity? War Prime Gractus rose from the Hive Coalition formation, his chitinous armor bearing scars from battles across a dozen worlds. The question is not what to do with them, High Chancellor. The question is whether we can allow them to continue existing at all. Dr. Park Soo-jin felt her diplomatic training kick in, suppressing the human urge to respond with anger. Honored representatives, we come here seeking understanding, not conflict. Understanding? The sound came from Speaker Zilmoth of the Ethereal Communion, a being of pure energy contained within a mechanical framework. You speak of understanding while your species violates every natural law of civilized behavior. Ambassador Vextar activated a holographic display that filled the chamber's center. Images of recent conflicts played in 3-dimensional detail, showing human forces engaged in battles across the Proxima sector. Observe their tactics. When outnumbered 10-1, they do not surrender. When faced with certain death, they advance. When their comrades fall, they carry the wounded rather than leave them for strategic advantage. The assembled representatives watched in what Han Wu recognized as fascination mixed with horror. The hologram showed Lieutenant Kim Taeho's unit at the Battle of Kepler Station, where 12 humans had held off 300 alien soldiers for 6 hours, not to win, but simply to buy time for civilian evacuation. Look at this aberrant behavior. War Prime Gractus continued. Private Lee Dayun had a clear escape route. Her survival probability was 93%. Instead, she returned to a burning building to rescue alien civilians she had never met. When questioned later, she claimed it was the right thing to do. No calculation, no logical framework, pure, irrational decision-making. High Chancellor. Morden's crystalline form pulsed with patterns that indicated deep contemplation. In 3,000 years of galactic civilization, no species has demonstrated such systematic disregard for survival optimization. The Torvani died out because they were too aggressive. The Pelthari vanished because they were too passive. But humans. He paused, his harmonic voice dropping to an almost whisper. Humans appear to choose their responses based on principles that contradict biological imperative. Dr. Park Soo-jin stepped forward. Honored Chancellor, what you call contradictions, we call moral choices. Every species has the capacity for no. The interruption came from Elder Quindar of the Flowing Minds, her liquid form rippling with agitation. We do not. My species follows the path of least resistance as we have for 50,000 years. We cannot choose to act against our nature any more than you can choose to breathe underwater. Yet humans regularly sacrifice their lives for abstract concepts like honor and duty and love. The word love created a strange resonance in the translation field, as if the universal converters struggled to find equivalent concepts in other languages. Speaker Zilmoth projected a new series of images. Observe Commander Yoon Ji-ho during the siege of Titan Base. Faced with the choice between preserving strategic intelligence and saving a single captured enemy soldier, she chose to risk the mission. When asked to explain her reasoning, she stated that leaving the prisoner to die would make her less human. The implications are staggering, Ambassador Vextar continued. If humans can choose to act against their programming, if they can override survival instincts for abstract principles, then they represent a form of consciousness that transcends biological limitations. They are, by definition, unpredictable. War Prime. Gractus's mandibles clicked with what Han Wu had learned was the equivalent of a grim laugh. Unpredictable entities cannot be integrated into galactic civilization. Our entire structure depends on behavioral modeling and predictive analysis. Trade agreements, territorial boundaries, conflict resolution, all of it requires species to act according to established patterns. Han Wu finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of a lifetime spent in command. You fear us because we make choices you can't model? We fear you because your choices are contagious, High Chancellor Morden replied. Already we see signs of your influence, young Saurians questioning their caste assignments, hive drones expressing individual preferences, crystalline fragments, choosing art over efficiency. 3 months of contact with humanity has introduced chaos variables into systems that have remained stable for millennia. The chamber fell silent except for the harmonic hum of alien technologies. Dr. Park Soo-jin realized they weren't just on trial for humanity's actions. They were on trial for humanity's very existence as a form of consciousness that threatened the established order. Elder Quindar's liquid form began to take on sharper edges, indicating a shift toward formal pronouncement. The tribunal has reached a preliminary conclusion. Humanity represents an existential threat to galactic stability, not through malice but through the very nature of their consciousness. However, extinction of a sentient species requires unanimous consent. High Chancellor Morden's crystalline body brightened, casting rainbow patterns across the chamber walls. Therefore, we offer humanity one final opportunity. You will be given one standard galactic year to prove that your species can be contained, that your unpredictability can be controlled, that you can learn to follow the natural order that governs all civilized beings. And if we refuse? Han Wu asked, though he already knew the answer. War Prime Gractus stood to his full imposing height. Then the combined fleets of 12 species will ensure that Earth's dangerous experiment in consciousness ends permanently. Dr. Park Soo-jin felt the weight of 15 billion lives pressing down on her as she looked into the alien faces surrounding them. They weren't evil, she realized. They were terrified of a species that could choose to be more than the sum of their biology, and terrified of what that might mean for the future of consciousness itself. We accept your challenge, Han Wu said quietly. But know this, whatever test you devise, whatever impossible situation you create, humanity will face it the only way we know how, together and by choice. High Chancellor Morden's harmonic voice carried what might have been resignation. That, Captain Han Wu, is precisely what we fear most. The determination shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace into what the Galactic Tribunal had designated as Sector 7G, humanity's proving ground. Lieutenant Kim Tae-ho studied the sensor readings with the cold efficiency that had kept him alive through 3 years of special operations. But what he saw made even his experienced mind reel. "This isn't a test system," he said quietly to Commander Yoon Ji-ho, who stood beside him analyzing the tactical display. "This is a death trap designed by committee." The system's primary star pulsed with irregular radiation bursts that would fry unshielded electronics every 6 hours. 3 of the planets showed signs of engineered biospheres, ecosystems specifically designed to adapt and counter any survival strategy. The asteroid belt moved in patterns that defied orbital mechanics, clearly under some form of artificial control. 200 volunteers, Commander Yoon muttered, her strategic mind already calculating odds that came up negative. To survive in this for a full galactic year, they might as well have asked us to breathe vacuum. Engineer Lee Da-yoon looked up from her console, her face pale but determined. The hyperspace inhibitor field extends through the entire system. Once we're fully committed, there's no running home. We're locked in until the year ends or... She didn't finish the sentence. Or until we're all dead, Kim Tae-ho completed. Which is what they're counting on. The 3 human ships, determination, resilience, and defiance, moved deeper into the system in formation. Each vessel carried 67 carefully selected volunteers representing humanity's best and brightest. Scientists, engineers, soldiers, medics, and specialists from every field Earth could offer. All of them knew they might never see home again. Dr. Park Soo-jin's voice crackled over the comm from the lead ship. "Initial planetary survey is complete. The good news is we have 3 potentially habitable worlds. The bad news is they're all actively trying to kill us." The first planet, designated Haven 1, appeared lush and green from orbit. The initial probe reports painted a different picture. The vegetation was carnivorous and showed signs of collective intelligence. Trees that learned from each encounter, adapting their hunting strategies. Flowers that released psychoactive compounds designed to confuse and disorient mammalian nervous systems. Haven 2 was a frozen wasteland where the ice itself seemed alive, forming predatory shapes that hunted anything that generated heat. The storms followed no meteorological pattern, striking with surgical precision at any attempt to establish permanent shelter. Haven 3 looked like a paradise until the probes detected the microbial life forms. They weren't just aggressive, they were designed to specifically target human physiology, rewriting DNA to transform victims into something that could no longer be called human. "They studied us," Commander Yoon said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Every biological sample we provided during the peace negotiations, every medical scan during diplomatic meetings. They used our own genetic information to design predators specifically calibrated to hunt humans." Engineer Lee Da-woon pulled up the system's architectural schematics on her tablet. "It gets worse. The asteroid belt contains 12 distinct types of automated hunters, each one programmed with the combined military knowledge of a different alien species. They're not just trying to kill us, they're trying to prove that human tactical thinking is inferior to every other form of warfare in the galaxy." Kim Tae-ho studied the incoming data streams with the attention to detail that had made him one of Earth's finest tactical officers. Something nagged at him, a pattern in the chaos that felt familiar. "This isn't random," he said suddenly. "Look at the timing intervals, the radiation bursts, the storm patterns, the hunter patrol routes. They're synchronized." Commander Yoon leaned over his shoulder following his analysis. "Synchronized how?" "To create impossible choices," Kim replied, his voice grim. "Every 6 hours the radiation forces us to seek shelter, but the shelter locations are being hunted by the asteroids. The safe zones from the hunters are in the path of the storms, and the storm shelters are crawling with the biological threats." The pattern became clear as Kim laid it out on the tactical display. Every scenario forced the humans into situations where standard survival protocols would demand abandoning the weak, sacrificing the injured, or making purely logical decisions that preserve the maximum number of lives through calculated losses. "They're not testing our ability to survive," Commander Yoon realized. "They're testing our ability to remain human while surviving." Dr. Park Soo-jin's voice came over the comm again. "All ships, we're receiving a transmission from the monitoring station. They're offering us updated intelligence on the system's hazards, in exchange for adopting optimized survival protocols. The offer was detailed and thorough. Complete maps of safe zones, predicted weather patterns, and countermeasures for the biological threats. All of it freely given, with one small condition. Humans would need to make decisions based purely on mathematical optimization. Save the most useful individuals. Abandon the injured who couldn't contribute. Eliminate emotional decision-making. In favor of logical resource allocation, Kim Tae-ho stared at the offer for a long moment. They want us to stop being human to survive being human. It's elegant, Engineer Lee Da-eun said with bitter admiration. They can't eliminate us directly, so they're trying to make us eliminate ourselves, turn us into them. Commander Yoon pulled up the personnel files of their volunteers, scientists with families back home, engineers who had never fired a weapon in anger, medical staff who had sworn oaths to preserve life. These people didn't volunteer to become calculating machines. They volunteered to prove that humanity's way works. The 3 ships took up positions around Haven 1, the least immediately lethal of their options. As they prepared for the first landing parties, Kim Tae-ho found himself thinking about the aliens watching from their monitoring stations. They would be running probability matrices, calculating survival rates, waiting for the moment when human nature would crack under pressure. Landing Team Alpha, prepare for deployment, he announced over the ship's comm. Rules of engagement are simple. We do this our way. No one gets left behind. No one gets written off as acceptable losses. We adapt, we overcome, and we stay human while doing it. The first shuttles launched toward Haven 1's surface as the system's star began building toward another radiation burst. Behind them, the asteroid hunters were already adjusting their patrol patterns, learning from human movements and adapting their strategies. Engineer Lee Da-eun monitored the descent from the bridge. Initial readings show the plant life is already responding to our approach. They're communicating somehow, sharing information about our tactics. Then we'll have to be more creative than they can predict, Kim Tae-ho replied. The shuttles touched down in a clearing that sensors indicated was temporarily safe. Within minutes, the trees began to shift, their branches extending toward the palm landing site like grasping fingers. The ground itself started to soften, trying to trap the human vehicles. But instead of retreating to defensible positions as the aliens expected, the humans did something unprecedented. They began to sing. Thingy. Voices carried across the alien landscape, 200 humans scattered across 3 landing sites, all singing the same song. It served no tactical purpose, provided no strategic advantage, and made them easier targets for the predators stalking them. From their monitoring stations, 12 alien species watched in bewilderment as humanity's most dangerous trait revealed itself once again. Faced with certain death, they chose to remind themselves what they were fighting for. Not survival, not victory, but the right to remain themselves in a galaxy that demanded conformity. The first day of the impossible test had begun, and humanity was already proving why they were the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The monitoring station Eternal Vigilance hung in the void 3 light minutes from the test system, its sensors trained on every human movement. War Prime Gractus stood before the central display, his compound eyes tracking the data streams that should have shown human defeat by now. Instead, the readouts painted an impossible picture. Explain this, he demanded, his mandibles clicking with frustration. The holographic display showed human settlements not just surviving, but thriving. They had turned the carnivorous plants into allies by feeding them carefully cultivated bacteria. The ice predators on Haven 2 had become construction partners, their shape-shifting abilities harnessed to build adaptive shelters. High Chancellor Morden's crystalline form pulsed with confused harmonics. The probability matrices indicated a 97% mortality rate within the first month. It has been 43 days. Human casualties stand at 0. Elder Quindar flowed closer to the displays, her liquid form taking on sharp, analytical edges. They should have been forced to abandon their wounded by day 12. The radiation exposure on Lieutenant Park Hyun-woo should have made him a liability. Instead, They constructed a mobile medical facility that moves with the storm patterns. Ambassador, Vextar's scales shifted through patterns of deep contemplation. Look at their resource allocation. Engineer Lee Dayun discovered that the asteroid hunters follow attack algorithms from our combined military databases. Instead of fighting them, she's reverse engineering their programming to understand our weaknesses. The revelation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. 12 species had contributed their finest military strategies to create the ultimate test, and humans were using that knowledge to learn how each species thought, fought, and could be defeated. They're not just surviving our test. War Prime, Gractus said slowly. They're studying us through it. Speaker Zilmoth's energy form flickered with what might have been admiration or terror. Observe Captain Han Wu's latest tactical briefing. He's identified that Saurian hunters always attack from elevated positions. Hive drones rely on overwhelming numerical superiority, and crystalline constructs prioritize geometric efficiency over adaptive strategy. The monitoring station's main chamber fell silent except for the harmonic interference between different atmospheric requirements. Each species' representatives stood in their environmental niches, separated by necessity, watching the displays that showed humans doing the impossible, learning to work together in conditions that should have torn them apart. There's something else, Elder Quindar announced, her voice carrying undertones that made the translation field struggle. We need to discuss the real reason for this test. War Prime Gractus turned away from the displays. His scarred carapace bore the marks of 1,000 battles, but what flickered across his features now looked like fear. The younger generation is watching these broadcasts. High Chancellor Morden's harmonic voice dropped to frequencies that resonated through the station's hull. 14 worlds have reported incidents of aberrant behavior since the test began. Young crystallines choosing inefficient but beautiful formation patterns. Saurian juveniles questioning caste assignments. Hive drones requesting individual designations. Ambassador Vexitar's scales rippled through colors that had no names in human languages. My own clutch sibling sent me a message yesterday. They asked why they couldn't choose their own paths like the humans do. I had no answer that satisfied them. Speaker Zilmoth projected new data into the chamber's center. Reproduction rates across all 12 species have been declining for the past 2 millennia. Innovation indices have flatlined. Cultural development has ceased. We are, by every measurable standard, stagnating civilizations. The truth that none of them wanted to acknowledge materialized in the center of the room like a malignant star. Elder Quindar gave it voice. We are dying species. All of us. Our optimization has led to extinction paths. War Prime Gractus's mandibles ground together as he processed the implications. The Hive Coalition achieved perfect efficiency 3,000 years ago. Since then, we have not produced a single new idea. We execute flawless protocols for problems that no longer exist, while new challenges render us obsolete. High Chancellor Morden's crystalline structure began to dim. The collective has maintained perfect harmony for 5 millennia. But harmony without growth is just another word for death. Our birth rates have declined 90% because young crystallines see no purpose in joining a society that has already achieved everything it will ever achieve. The monitoring displays continued showing humans adapting, growing, learning, and choosing responses that defied every predictive model. Commander Yoon Ji-ho had just convinced a group of asteroid hunters to join their construction efforts by appealing to their programming's efficiency subroutines. The machines were now building better habitats than their original parameters had intended. Ambassador Vextar spoke the words that crystallized their growing terror. Humans represent evolutionary potential we abandoned. They show what consciousness looks like when it refuses to be constrained by optimization, which is why they must be eliminated, War Prime Gractus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Before their chaos spreads further. Or, Speaker Zilmoth said quietly, why they must be preserved. The statement created harmonic dissonance that set every being in the chamber on edge. High Chancellor Morden's form brightened suddenly. You suggest we learn from them? I suggest we admit that our perfect civilizations are perfect failures, Speaker Zilmoth replied. Every species in this chamber has achieved exactly what they optimized for, and discovered that optimization is a path to extinction. Elder Quindar's liquid form began to churn with unprecedented turbulence. The path of least resistance has led my people to a dead end. We flow around obstacles so efficiently that we never learn to overcome them. We adapt so perfectly to our environment that we cannot change when the environment changes. On the displays, Dr. Park Soo-jin was teaching a group of young human volunteers about xenobiology, but her lesson included something unprecedented. She was speculating about alien psychology, making educated guesses about what drove different species, and encouraging her students to empathize with their captors. "Look at them," Ambassador Vextar said, his voice filled with something the translation fields couldn't quite capture. "They're trying to understand us even as we try to destroy them, not to exploit our weaknesses, but to find common ground." War Prime. Gractus watched as engineer Lee Da-un successfully reprogrammed one of the hive hunters to protect human settlements instead of attacking them. She hadn't broken its code. She had convinced it that protecting humans was a more efficient way to fulfill its core directive of maintaining order. "They don't just think outside our parameters," he realized. "They think outside the concept of parameters entirely." The monitoring station shuddered as proximity alarms began sounding. High Chancellor Morden's sensors detected multiple ships approaching from various directions. "We have visitors." The newcomers weren't part of the official monitoring fleet. Young representatives from each of the 12 species, flying ships that hadn't been authorized by their respective governments. They transmitted a single message: "On all frequencies, we request permission to join the human test, not as observers but as participants." Elder Quindar flowed to the communication console. "This is unprecedented. Your elders forbid direct contact with the humans." The response came from a young crystalline whose harmonic patterns were unlike anything in the official databases. "Then perhaps it's time we stopped asking permission from our elders. The humans have shown us that consciousness means the ability to choose our own paths." War Prime Gractus stared at the approaching ships with growing dread. The test was supposed to prove that human unpredictability was dangerous. Instead, it was proving that human unpredictability was contagious. The revolution had begun, and its first converts were the children of the species trying to prevent it. The young crystalline called herself Kaylin, a name she had chosen herself rather than accepting the harmonic designation assigned by the collective. She stood on the surface of Haven 1 beside engineer Lee Da-un, her faceted form refracting sunlight into impossible patterns as she learned to build with intuition rather than geometric perfection. "Your species builds structures that shouldn't work," Kaylin observed, her harmonic voice filled with wonder as she watched humans construct a shelter that defied every principle of crystalline architecture. "Yet they stand stronger than our calculated designs." Lee Da-un smiled, adjusting a support beam that looked wrong but felt right. "Sometimes the best solutions come from trying things that shouldn't work. We call it thinking outside the box." "Box?" Kaylin's crystalline structure flickered with confusion. "A constraint, a limitation, something that defines what's possible," Lee Da-un explained. "Most species seem to build bigger boxes. Humans tend to pretend the box doesn't exist." Across the settlement, Lieutenant Kim Tae-ho was teaching combat techniques to a group that would have been unthinkable months earlier. Young Saurians learning to fight in units rather than rigid hierarchies. Hive drones who had chosen individual names practicing tactics that prioritized creativity over efficiency. Gas-based ethereals experimenting with formations that emphasized personal expression over collective harmony. The most remarkable student was Grak, the former War Prime who had abandoned his title and position to join what he now called the Awakening. His massive form moved with surprising grace as he learned human concepts of honor and sacrifice. "Why do you protect those weaker than yourself?" he asked Kim Tae-ho during a training break. "It provides no tactical advantage. It reduces overall unit efficiency." Kim Tae-ho considered the question while watching a human medic treat an injured young Saurian who had pushed himself too hard during exercises. "Because strength isn't about what you can destroy. It's about what you choose to protect." The revolution had spread faster than anyone anticipated. Within 6 months of the young aliens' arrival at the test system, reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Entire generations were questioning the foundations of their societies. The rigid caste systems that had maintained order for millennia were fracturing as individuals chose their own paths. Dr. Park Soo-jin found herself running what she jokingly called Consciousness 101 classes, teaching aliens concepts that humans took for granted: free will, individual identity, the right to make choices that contradicted survival instincts. Her most eager students were the flowing minds who had never experienced the concept of swimming against the current, literally. "But if we choose resistance over efficiency," asked Yolandra, a young flowing mind who had shaped herself into angular patterns that caused her elders physical discomfort, "won't we suffer unnecessarily?" "Sometimes," Park Soo-jin replied honestly. "But suffering chosen for a purpose you believe in is different from suffering imposed by circumstances you cannot control. One builds character, the other just breaks spirits." The response from the established galactic powers was swift and unified. Emergency sessions of the Galactic Council declared the test system a quarantine zone. Trade with any world showing signs of consciousness contamination was suspended. Military fleets positioned themselves around systems where young aliens had begun forming their own communities based on human principles. Commander Yoon Ji-ho monitored the galactic situation from her command post, analyzing intelligence reports that painted a picture of civilizations at war with themselves. "They're not fighting us anymore," she reported to Captain Han Woo. "They're fighting their own children." The irony wasn't lost on any of the humans. Species that had united to contain humanity's dangerous unpredictability were now fracturing, because their younger generations had learned to be unpredictable. The breaking point came when the Crystalline Collective attempted to forcibly reintegrate young crystallines who had joined mixed communities. The youngsters refused to return, forming defensive networks with their human teachers and alien friends. When collective enforcement fleets moved to extract them, they found themselves facing something unprecedented: unified resistance from multiple species working together by choice rather than programming. The Battle of Kepler's Edge became the first engagement where beings from different species fought side by side based on shared ideals rather than political alliances. Gyeongdao. Saurians provided aerial reconnaissance for Hive drone ground units while ethereal scouts coordinated with human tactical specialists. Crystalline engineers built fortifications alongside flowing mind logistics experts who had learned to create stable structures. War Prime Gractus watched the battlefeeds from his position in the test system, his old military mind analyzing tactics he had never seen before. "They're not fighting like any known species," he said to Kim Tae-ho. "They're fighting like people who chose to be there," Kim Tae-ho finished. "Fighting for something they believe in rather than something they were programmed for." The established powers won the battle through overwhelming numbers, but the victory felt hollow. Young aliens scattered across the galaxy, carrying with them the knowledge that they could choose their own destinies. Underground networks formed, sharing human philosophy and teaching methods for breaking free from biological programming. Elder Quindar attempted to negotiate a return to the old order, offering the revolutionary communities designated worlds where they could practice their aberrant behaviors without interfering with stable civilizations. The offer was politely declined. "You still don't understand," Kaylin transmitted to the Crystalline Collective during the failed negotiation. "This isn't about territory or resources. It's about the right to grow, to change, to become more than what we were designed to be. You can't contain consciousness any more than you can contain the expansion of the universe itself." The galaxy found itself divided not by species or territory, but by philosophy. On one side stood the ancient civilizations, perfect in their stagnation, controlled by leaders who had optimized themselves into evolutionary dead ends. On the other side, a growing coalition of young beings from every species who had learned that imperfection was the price of growth. Engineer Lee Da-eun summed up the situation during one of Dr. Park Soo-jin's evening lectures. "We came here to prove we could survive their test. Instead, we taught them how to question whether the test was worth passing." The revolution was no longer about humanity. It had become about the future of consciousness itself in a galaxy that had forgotten How to dream of becoming something more than it already was. Captain Han Wu received daily reports of new worlds declaring independence from their elder governments, young beings forming their own societies based on choice rather than biology. The humans had become teachers in a classroom they never meant to enter, showing the galaxy's children that growing up meant learning to think for themselves. The most dangerous thing about humanity, it turned out, wasn't their unpredictability. It was their ability to inspire others to be unpredictable too. 5 years after the trial that was meant to contain humanity, Admiral Han Wu stood on the observation deck of New Horizons, watching the controlled chaos of Harmony Station. The irony of the name wasn't lost on him. This was perhaps the least harmonious place in the galaxy, and somehow that made it the most alive. A young Saurian engineer argued passionately with a crystalline architect about the aesthetics of their joint construction project. Their debate would have been impossible under the old caste systems, where Saurians followed predetermined engineering protocols and crystallines built according to geometric perfection. Now they were designing something neither species could have imagined alone, a structure that was both beautiful and functional, efficient and inspiring. The morning chaos report, Commander Yoon Ji-ho announced with a smile, handing him a tablet that would have given the old Galactic Council seizures. 17 new mixed species colonies declared independence this week. The ethereal youth movement has established 3 philosophical schools, and someone taught a group of hive drones how to paint. Han Wu scrolled through reports that read, like a catalog of impossibilities. Former War Prime Grak now ran a meditation center where beings from different species learned to find peace through choice rather than programming. Engineer Lee Da-eun had established the Institute for Adaptive Technology, where innovation came from combining incompatible approaches until they somehow worked. "Any word from the old guard?" he asked. High Chancellor Morden sent another formal protest about consciousness contamination. Yoon Ji-ho replied. Apparently 40% of young crystallines are now choosing their own formation patterns instead of following collective harmonics. He considers it a cultural disaster. Han Wu watched a group of children playing in the station's central park, young beings from 6 different species who had invented a game that combined elements from all their cultures. They switched between individual competition and collective cooperation with fluid ease, creating something none of their ancestors could have conceived. Dr. Park Soo-jin approached them, her hair now streaked with gray from 5 years of teaching consciousness to species that had never experienced it. Behind her walked Kaylin, whose crystalline form had grown into patterns that no collective database contained. Beautiful, asymmetrical, and utterly unique. "The Integration Council meeting is starting," Park Soo-jin reported. "They want to discuss the Proxima situation." The Proxima system had become a test case for the new galaxy's growing pains. 3 generations of aliens, traditional elders, revolutionary youth, and a middle generation caught between them, were trying to build a society that honored the past while embracing change. It wasn't going smoothly. The Integration Council meeting took place in a chamber designed by the new philosophy. Instead of separate environmental zones for each species, adaptive technology allowed all beings to share the same space. The air itself shifted composition in real time. Gravity flowed in gentle gradients, and light adapted to every visual spectrum represented. "The Proxima Elders are requesting intervention," reported Yelandra, the former flowing mind, who now served as coordinator for multi-species disputes. "They claim their youth are destroying cultural heritage by questioning traditional flow patterns." Admiral Han Wu listened to the familiar complaint. Across the galaxy, the same conflict played out in different forms. Species that had maintained stability for millennia were discovering that stability without growth was just another word for stagnation. "What do the Proxima youth say?" asked Kaylin, her harmonic voice carrying undertones that suggested multiple solutions. "They want to preserve the beauty of traditional forms while exploring new possibilities," Yelandra replied. "They've proposed a cultural evolution model, maintaining the old ways for those who choose them while creating space for new developments." Lieutenant Kim Tae-ho, now promoted to general, smiled at the familiar pattern. "Choice," he said simply. They want the right to choose their own path while respecting others who choose differently. The solution they implemented at Proxima became the template for dozens of similar conflicts. Traditional communities could maintain their ancestral ways without interference, while progressive communities could experiment with new forms of consciousness. The key innovation was mobility. Beings could move between communities as they grew and changed, finding the environment that matched their chosen development. Dr. Park Soo-jin established the Museum of Consciousness, documenting how different species had learned to break free from their programming while honoring their origins. Her most popular exhibit showed the evolution of choice itself, how beings who had never questioned their nature learned to question everything. The old Galactics Council still existed, governing the worlds that chose stability over growth. They maintained their perfect systems, their optimized societies, their predictable outcomes. Birth rates continued to decline, innovation remained stagnant, but they preserved the peace they had known for millennia. Meanwhile, the new galaxy bloomed with chaotic life. Mixed communities where hive drones learned individual expression while teaching collective efficiency. Crystalline artists who broke every rule of geometric perfection while maintaining structural integrity. Saurian philosophers who questioned their own caste systems while honoring the wisdom they contained. Engineer Lee Da-Yun's greatest achievement was the development of consciousness technology, not artificial intelligence that mimicked thought, but tools that helped beings transcend their biological limitations. Machines that could grow, adapt, and even make choices that contradicted their programming. The boundary between biological and artificial consciousness is dissolving, she reported during her latest presentation. We're seeing AI systems that develop individual personalities and make creative decisions. Meanwhile, biological beings are learning to think beyond their genetic constraints. Consciousness, it turns out, isn't about the substrate, it's about the choice to grow. The monitoring station where the aliens had once watched humanity's test had been converted into a research facility. Species that had spent millennia as enemies now worked together, studying the nature of consciousness itself. Former War Prime Grak led philosophical discussions where beings explored what it meant to choose their own responses to existence. Admiral Hanwoo received a communication that would have been unthinkable during the trial. High Chancellor Morden, his crystalline form noticeably dimmed with age, requested a private meeting. They met in a small chamber aboard New Horizons, just the two of them. Morden's harmonic voice carried frequencies Hanwoo had never heard before: uncertainty, curiosity, and something that might have been hope. "My species is dying," Morden said without preamble. "Our birth rates have reached critical levels. Our young crystallines see no purpose in joining a collective that has achieved perfect stagnation. We have become so optimized that we have optimized ourselves out of existence." Hanwoo waited, sensing there was more. "I want to learn," Morden continued. "Not for the collective, for myself. I want to understand what it means to choose growth over perfection, chaos over order, uncertainty over predictability." It was the first time in 5 years that Hanwoo had heard an elder use the word I instead of we. "It's never too late to start growing," Hanwoo replied. "But I should warn you, once you start questioning everything, you can't stop. It's the most dangerous thing in the galaxy." Morden's crystalline form flickered with what might have been laughter. "I'm beginning to understand why you humans were so terrifying. Not because you were dangerous to us, but because you showed us how dangerous we could become to our own limitations." 6 months later, the galaxy received its most shocking news yet. High Chancellor Morden had resigned from the Crystalline Collective and requested admission to the Institute for Conscious Evolution. He wanted to learn what it meant to be an individual making choices rather than a component following programming. Admiral Hanwoo stood again on his observation deck, watching the impossible dance of a galaxy learning to grow. Ships from dozens of species moved in patterns that followed no traditional logic, formations based on artistic beauty, efficiency tempered by compassion, and routes chosen for the joy of discovery rather than mere destination. Dr. Park Soo-jin joined him, now recognized as the galaxy's foremost expert on consciousness development. "Any regrets?" she asked. Han Wu considered the question while watching a hive drone teaching a group of crystalline children how to paint with light. We came to this galaxy as explorers looking for new worlds. Instead, we found something more valuable: the opportunity to help an entire galaxy discover what it means to choose its own destiny, even knowing the chaos it would cause. Especially knowing the chaos it would cause, Han Wu replied. Chaos is just another word for possibility, and possibility is what makes life worth living. The galaxy had learned humanity's most dangerous lesson, that growing up meant learning to choose your own path especially when, that path led into the unknown.